So this is the 23:50 hours UK time, 22:50 hours GMT edition of the Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcasting only on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions. This is Tuesday, 28th of March 2023. So one of the things that is a central experience, day-to-day experience of people, ordinary people, especially in areas like the so-called inner cities that used to be called, or the deprived council estates, council housing estates, of which there are many in the boroughs like Tower Hamlets. So one of the things that has been a festering reality is the role of the local Tower Hamlets Council and the role played by its counterparts, corresponding borough councils in other similarly festering boroughs, is that the councils allow the gangs of criminals, mainly born and brought up in the areas, in many cases on the same estates, that they plague with their criminality. Today, that is Tuesday, the Murdoch-owned Times newspaper, of course, runs the main page one lead about rowdy tenants being exposed under proposed new Act of Parliament to being evicted in 2 weeks. Now, there is no reference in the heading or in the subheadings to the criminal young offspring of the adults. And this is not a reference to the social housing estates. This is a reference to private owners of private property for rent. So we shall be talking a bit more about this in this edition because it's very important. So important, in fact, that if the combined resources of the likes of Jeff Bezos of Amazon and the combined resources of Elon Musk, of Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, to name only 4 American possessors of wealth, if you like, all these combined resources of these 4 were put together, and any action addressing all the criminal offspring plaguing the estates in Tower Hamlets and other parts of the United Kingdom, those resources would not be enough. There would not be enough resources to deal with the criminally born and criminally raised perpetrations called the young people on the estates and in the rest of society. So when the Times runs this heading, evict rowdy tenants in 2 weeks, crackdown will strengthen landlords' powers. Airbnb database to help councils tackle noise. Now, this is whoever is the person in post as the actual editor of this Times newspaper now. This is the stupidest possible piece of so-called journalism. Every element in that front page item on the Times of Tuesday, the 28th of March 2023 is wrong, factually untrue, because there will not be a crackdown and there will not be any end to the criminality. The criminality that is actually represented by the behavior and the presence in the equation of private landlords, as they call them. Landlord is a completely offensive term because it's a combination of two words, one of which we totally object to, Lord. No human being, as we say in principle, is a Lord. Only God is a Lord, the Lord. So we should come back to further discussion of the stupidity of Fleet Street and of the Murdoch-owned newspapers, and we shall refer to the very short clip shown on the view slot on the ABC network in another country, featuring Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant spoke on that View program, very short clip, that one, and he said that the role of the non-tax paying press barons in the United Kingdom was central in deciding who gets to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, because the candidate for Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has got to meet the condition which they gladly meet, which is, to quote Hugh Grant, suck up to the press barons. And Hugh Grant said that the press barons are not, they don't pay taxes to the UK tax collecting authority. They owe the tax, but they don't pay, and they don't care because they control the political destiny of the people who constitute the government. That is what Hugh Grant said. That comes very, very much as part of the discussion in the media that has been ongoing about the role of the press in this country. So this item on the front page of the Times of Tuesday, the 28th of March 2023, is completely typical, and it is typically and untruthful and misleading. Now, just to read a couple of paragraphs of this particular piece that is byline to Home Affairs editor, the person that is called the Home Affairs editor, Matt Dayton. It says, and I'm quoting, I don't say the word I'm quoting as if I believe the word. It says, landlords will be able to evict tenants who are disruptive to neighbors, cause damage, or fall behind on their rent within 2 weeks under government plans to tackle antisocial behavior. As I said, there will not be any tackling of real antisocial behavior by the government that is fronted currently by Rishi Sunak or by any government that follows him. Whatever political brand that government may carry or bear. Because the government in the United Kingdom has never been about society, really. And that is true of the period or periods when the governments were formed by the Labour Party. Because the Labour Party essentially is part of the same controlling bureaucracy. The same controlling bureaucracy as is the Conservative Party. There is no accountability. There is no accountability for the decisions that are made in the name of local councils, by local council employees. And there is no accountability for the decisions made by the central government in the name of the country as a whole. So, what happens when decisions are made about housing, about evicting, about rent, about noise, about antisocial behavior, is not decided by any ethics or morality or any principle of accountability or application of values, recognizing the needs and freedoms of the so-called neighbors on these estates. And the reason why there is no relevance taken into account or given to the actual people in the estate, on the estate, in the estate or estates, is because in the behavior of the so-called judiciary, mainly starting from the magistrates level to county courts to the divisions of the High Court, Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, so-called, there is absolutely no recognition of society. Anyone who wants to know more about this assertion that I'm making world exclusively, consistently, and I have been making it very, very extensively for many, many years. And I have to mention, I mean, in 1973, 50 years ago, I had the opportunity to become a holder of a license called barrister at law. I rejected that. I rejected that because of the evidence that I witnessed of the central reliance by the licensed law traders on criminality by themselves. The role being played by the licensed barristers or licensed solicitors was that of crooks and criminals, prostitutes on hire. Prostitutes in the generic term, not in sexual necessarily, but in the sense of being devoid of morality, devoid of any ethics, devoid of any conscience. So the Times newspaper is leading this piece about the plans by Rishi Sunak, which is part of the propaganda for the election or electoral kind of propaganda being made by Rishi Sunak and aided and abetted by the Times. On the inside pages, there are two-page kind of spread on the same theme, featuring Rishi Sunak. The picture is such as to suggest to most of the zombies that Rishi Sunak is actually physically chasing some rowdy tenants. That is how the picture has been creatively designed and composed and placed. Now, in 1996, the calendar year before the election of May 1997, when the so-called Labour Party, fronted by the war criminal to be Tony Blair, got in, Jack Straw was in the shadow cabinet of Tony Blair at the time in 1996, when a lot of discussion was taking place in the main media about crimes similar to this neighborhood crimes and criminality that the Times is actually referring to, or peddling or retailing for the benefit of the conservatives. And one of the things that I suggested to Jack Straw as policy in a communication I sent by fax was something that was later adopted and called the antisocial behavior, if you like, penalty. But I didn't want that to be a penalty. I wanted a systematic, thoroughly systematic and rigorous series of crimes to be included in the plan against recurring, festering criminals, both on the council estates, so-called social estates, and elsewhere in society. But because neither Jack Straw nor Tony Blair, nor later John Prescott, the criminal, John Prescott is a thug, and the criminal was, in terms of Tower Hamlets, As the Secretary of State at the time for the Environment, John Prescott, he was more interested in the capitalization and monetization of the housing stock that belonged to the public, to the people, as it was owned by the Tower Hamlets Council. And this criminal, John Prescott, went along the suggestion made by a local gang of criminals who posed as the Poplaharka. And that gang of criminals, called Poplaharka, was allowed to loot thousands of properties that belonged to the people of Tower Hamlets. And Harka has made the values of those properties rise every so often ever since. While the housing crisis in Tower Hamlets has also got worse. Now, in the context of all of this, what role have I been playing in Tower Hamlets? Of course, I'm the only campaigner in Tower Hamlets that actually generically addresses all the issues that affect the whole of the community. In relation to housing, my campaign continues. And I said years ago, in public, on the record, that the other confection of criminals combined to rob Tower Hamlets' population of the housing stock was the Tower Hamlets community housing. And in my very short presentation of the question to the so-called full council, which behaves as full council or council of fools, in, well, exactly 10 years ago, in June 2013, I raised the questions about the stock transfer. And my question obviously had to be submitted weeks or months ahead of the meeting that would officially record that question. So therefore it was accessible to the corrupt regime fronted by the corrupt incumbent in the corrupt post of mayor, Lutfur Rahman. And Lutfur Rahman had in his corrupt confession called cabinet an individual councillor called Rabina Khan, who was totally falsely described as the cabinet member, quote, for housing. She was in post to degenerate Tower Hamlets, to collude with the criminals that were causing perpetual problems on housing, on every aspect of housing. And Rabina Khan was a liar. What Rabina Khan didn't understand was that I knew more about her lying, her career of lying, that she could ever imagine possible for her to understand the extent of my knowledge of her lying. But I didn't want to upset her pathetic little career by focusing on my knowledge about her criminality. I gave her the benefit of the doubt And I gave her the benefit of the doubt and gave her the evidence and gave her the reasonability. And I gave her the expectation, most basic expectation that ordinary people would have, to tell the truth and stop lying. So when I attempted to present that question to the full council, which behaved as the council of fools, Rabina Khan perpetrated typically, because Rabina Khan is a habitual liar, and she lied on that occasion. I shall bring the evidence what is available on the council's website shortly. Not only that, this meeting where I was presenting that question was chaired by a criminal, racist liar, Labour Party councillor. And the Labour Party councillor, informally, not known on the records, but informally, was part of the gang that promoted the criminal agenda pursued by the second biggest gang of thugs, looting the housing stock of Tar Hamlets, which is Tar Hamlets community housing. So as she recognized, the chair of the so-called ceremonial mayor or the speaker, she realized that if she allowed me full platform to present my question with effective evidential support, then it would do damage not only to individuals like the criminal Mike Tyrrell, the terrible liar and racist criminal, but it would also impact on her, the ceremonial chair of the meeting of the Tar Hamlets Council. And Rabina Khan herself would be exposed because Tar Hamlets community housing, also known as THCH, has got anything between 50 to 200 individuals in Tar Hamlets who are connected one way or the other with the gang of criminals who operate from the base called the East London Mosque. I'm not saying the East London Mosque is a criminal base, but I'm saying that criminals have been operating by abusing the presence of the East London Mosque. The two are very distinct entities, but because the criminals are an operating gang, ordinary musallis or ordinary people, ordinary Muslims who go to the mosque for the purposes of saying prayers, have not either the time or the opportunity to reflect on what is going on via the physical facilities available at the and through the presence of the East London Mosque for the criminals. Now, THCH has got criminals recruited for allegedly housing services. The criminals are directly, if you like, handled and organized by the political party in Bangladesh called the Jamaat-e-Islami. Now, what Rabina Khan doesn't understand or didn't understand was that I have been politically as active since way before she was biologically born, as I was in June 2013, and as I have been ever since. And the political outlet or outfit called the Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh is not anything to do with Islam. It is a political gang operating in the name of Islam. Make the distinction. The understanding of Islam can only be based on the Holy Quran and the traditions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But these criminals who have been serving the gang, Tar Hamlets community housing, are criminals in the generic, ordinary sense of the word. Criminals. They never have any interaction, democratic or social, let alone ethical or moral, with ordinary people who are tenants or applicants for housing or are in need of housing support, etc., etc. These criminals are a replica. They are a replica of the Jamaat Islami's structure in Bangladesh, which is undemocratic, anti-democratic, very secretive, and very fundamentally anti-Islamic. So if you look at the television program that was aired on the 1st of March, this is March, ending another month, 1st of March 2010, under the banner of the Dispatches project on Channel 4 television, as fronted by Andrew Gilligan. Gilligan, like all the British racist journalists, anti-Muslim journalists, are hampered in their objective journalism by their DNA based on anti-Islamic hatred, which is why, although Andrew Gilligan pretended to be presenting a program about the abuse of the Eastern Mosque by outfit which he described as including the IFE or the Islamic Forum Europe. These journalists, like Andrew Gilligan, fail to reach the actual height of objective truthfulness. So they betray the objective expectation of the ordinary people who are misled into thinking that they are serving the cause of objective journalism. They are not. But having said all these, despite all these, if you like, defects built in Andrew Gilligan's Dispatches program, broadcast on Channel 4 Dispatches program on the 1st of March 2010, it did contain quite a bit of information about the operational, if you like, tactics and the operational kind of giveaways, if you like. For example, when Andrew Gilligan referred to George Galloway, who was still incumbent as the Member of Parliament for Bethnal Green and Bow, which contains area that the Eastern Mosque is based in, Whitechapel. The Galloway reference was made by Andrew Gilligan in a very elaborate kind of roundabout way to say that Galloway had said, in a chilling combination of imagery and words, how terrifyingly powerful the Islamic Forum Europe was. Now, to this day, I don't know anyone. I absolutely don't know anyone in the community who knows anyone else in the community in Tower Hamlets who is a member of what Andrew Gilligan introduced as the Islamic Forum Europe, IFE. So it to this day remains a secretive thing for me. I don't know anyone, so I cannot have any first hand or second hand sourcing of anything that they're up to or they're doing. But I do know that the records contain so many references to the Islamic Forum Europe that in terms of references, in terms of the accessibility of the materials containing references to the words Islamic Forum Europe, it's impossible to ignore. It is there. Plus the role of the then local MP for Poplar and Limehouse, whose name I factually have edited to read as Piss Patrick in order to denote the worst possible meaning, because Fitzpatrick, Jim Fitzpatrick, is a notorious anti-Muslim hater and a liar and a dysfunctional criminal who has been one of the key publicly platformed gangsters that has promoted the gangsters' purpose for the benefit of Poplar Harka to rob and to loot the huge housing stock that belonged to the people of Tower Hamlets, ordinary people. Now, in the last, let's say in the last year, the Tower Hamlets community housing has been the subject of the regulatory investigation by a bureaucratic outfit called RSH, Regulator for Social Housing. Now, I don't for a moment accept that they are regulators, and I don't accept for a moment that the Tower Hamlets community housing can ever be called a social housing provider. But that is the name. So I am on the record factually referring to the name and the words used by these people, and the words are accessible on the government website. Let's check this and then we shall go to the records of my question in June 2013, and I shall continue the commentary, the rest of the commentary about the corrupt career and dishonest behavior by Rabina Khan. Now, there is a website called Social Housing. It's a website called socialhousing.co.uk. And in a news item dated the 23rd of March 2023, it has the heading RSH, that is the regulator for social housing, downgrades East London Housing Association to G3B3. Now, let's read the bit. The English regulator has downgraded Tower Hamlets Community Housing, THTHCH, to G3 stroke V3 after the small East London based housing association breached the economic standards. Now, we shall go back to other items because this one will take longer because they require you to register in order to see the fuller piece. The item on the Inside Housing website, dated again the 23rd March 2023, by somebody called Stephen Delahanty. The heading reads, Landlord breaches economic standards after findings reveal it is unable to meet day-to-day costs. Now read again. Landlord, that is Tower Hamlets Community Housing, breaches economic standards after findings reveal it is unable to meet day-to-day standard costs. Now, when Lutfur Rahman spoke to me in Siloti and said that he would sit down with me and listen to my advice, factual advice about the corrupt, rogue criminality that was going on in Tower Hamlets Council and through Tower Hamlets Council, he said to me that he would do that he would sit down with me after settling down. And then he said, he admitted that he knew that what I had to talk about concerned. I'm explaining and interpreting the briefer conversation into this understandable and accessible language. Concerned the shaitan, the word shaitan, he said. He said that the shaitans were at that stage on the 29th of October 2010, which was a Friday. He said that the shaitans were already active to do mischief and do wrongs. Now, Inside Housing claims to be the leading housing publication, and it says that it breaks stories about housing, etc., etc. But it is not true. Inside Housing is less corrupt, let's say, than some of its rivals, but it is as corrupt as it is, and it is not capable of telling the truth. And what it is doing as well, like the other website, it requires registration. So I can't read the full piece without having to register, which means it will take quite a while to register. So I'm not going to register on this program. Let's see if we can access the government website. So the government website has got an updated content dated the 23rd of March 2023, and it is had a decision Tower Hamlets Community Housing, the regulator of social housing's view of how well Tower Hamlets Community Housing is meeting regulatory standards. Well, that is a complete untruth. There are so many regulatory standards that cannot possibly be covered by this heading or by this report. But regulatory standards are routinely breached by THCH criminals as well as their counterpart, bigger sized gangsters at Poplaharka, with the collusion and complicity of the corruptly fronted Tower Hamlets Local Council. So, on the government website, there are items going back to the 30th of March 2016. So, there are almost a dozen items on the government.gov, the government.uk website. So let's read the bit that is supposed to be the updated bit or details. So this is the one on the dated the 23rd of March. The current regulatory judgment, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, 23rd of March 2023. Regulator of social housing narrative, regulatory judgment. Provider Tower Hamlets Community Housing, Regulatory Code L4260. Publication date 23rd of March 2023. Governance grade G3. Viability grade V3. Reason for publication, governance and viability downgrades. Regulatory route, stability check and reactive engagement. Regulatory judgment. This regulatory judgment downgrades our, that is RSH, previous assessment of Tower Hamlets Community Housing's governance grade from G1 to G3 and its viability grade from B2 to V3. This means that there are issues of serious regulatory concern that the provider is working with us to address. Look, it just contradicts itself. It doesn't complete the statement of the extent of the failure and dysfunction by the crooks. It circumvents that by saying the provider, that is THCH, is working with us to address, which is in the same sentence, the fuckers. They're not fucking regulating at all. Following the 2022 stability check and a subsequent investigation, the regulator has concluded it lacks assurance. The Tower Hamlets Community Housing has a robust business planning, risk, and control framework. What the fuck? It does not say anything about society, anything about the huge numbers of basic housing needs that are being betrayed, let down, denied, messed up, distorted by the crooks that were allowed to take over the housing stock at the time that they did, which was not long after the creation of the robbing machine called the Poplaharka. Evidence gathered by the regulator during its investigation confirmed weaknesses in THCH's internal controls framework, and that the board of THCH has not been managing its affairs with an appropriate degree of skill, diligence, prudence, and foresight. The board has failed to demonstrate it understands and is managing the risks THCH faces, or has appropriate mitigation strategies in place to ensure the long-term viability of the organization and protect social housing assets. Notice that. Fuck them. Protect social housing assets, but no mention still of the social housing tenants, their rights, their needs, and what they have contributed to drawing attention to the corruption, dysfunction, and lack of viability and lack of accountability, lack of skill on the part of the crooks called the Hrs community housing. Any criminal recruited through the operation of the criminals via the East London Mosque for the careers at the THCH would have been on the records claimed to have been skilled and able to do the things that this regulator has reluctantly considered it doesn't have. So take the commentary back to Andrew Gilligan and explore what he meant by his references to the conversation or statement Andrew Gilligan attributed to one of the plotters, as he described, who was plotting. Remember, that was 1st of March 2010. 1st of March 2010, even before the referendum on whether the Tower Hamlets Council should have an executive mayor, let alone the nomination of any candidates. So despite all the absences of all these facts, these these gangsters presented or referred to by Andrew Gilligan on the Dispatches program were very confident that it would be Lutfur Rahman who would be the executive mayor in the name of Tower Hamlets Council. How do they know that? It's like a machine was operating to manufacture a person called Lutfur Rahman and to neatly slot him in the post that had been mechanically created for the purpose of looting the resources by that mechanically created post, and by that mechanically created an immoral incumbent in that post called Lutfur Rahman as early as 1st of March 2010. Now, the RSH continues. Tower Hamlets Community Housing's financial position is weak, and it is faced with a substantial program of fire remediation work up to the end of 25-26, that is 2025 to 2026. THCH is finalizing documentation for a covenant waiver from its funder, as it failed to identify the full accounting implications of the Buildings Safety Act 2022, that is the fire hazard, remember, earlier in the financial year, and made a poor decision surrounding budgeting for the recovery of costs. Waivers are also being sought for the subsequent financial years 2023 to 2026. Irrespective of securing the necessary covenant waivers, THCH's business plan demonstrates that it is unable to meet the costs of its day-to-day operating activities. and repairs liabilities from its rental income stream. There is no capacity for any future development. Finally, stock condition data upon which forecast stock reinvestment provisions in the business plan are based is outdated and over reliant on cloning. Although this is now being addressed, the RSH is timidly abusing language and camouflaging the truth under this abuse strategy. On its own part, we do not have assurance that the business plan's cost provisions are based on prudent assumptions. So they're, although they're referring to themselves as social housing, they're actually using the language of the market. Fuck them. THCH has been open and transparent with the regulator and has acknowledged the regulator's concerns. A governance improvement plan has been drafted. THCH is also working with the regulator and external advisors to ensure it has the capacity, capability, and support to make the changes required. This is to ensure THCH's long term viability and to address the governance and financial viability issues identified in this regulatory judgment. So, this THCH, this is 10 years after I presented the question. And the question was being interrupted by the speaker on the one hand and by Rabina Khan on the other. And both of them, Rabina Khan belonged to the corruptocracy fronted by Lutfur Rahman as the incumbent in the corrupt post of mayor. And the ceremonial chair who interrupted the proceedings belonged to the Labour Party. But despite their different political color, both these participants, both these councillors, were unhappy that the truth was about to be told about the corrupt THCH, that both of them were, in their own separate ways, part of and contributing to the perpetration of against the interests of ordinary people in the interest of against the interests of the community. And Rabina Khan, I'll come to the record if I can find the record on the website of Travellers Council. Rabina Khan lied. So let's check before I go into the actual quotation of her lying. So it was dated the 26th of June, Wednesday, 26th of June 2013. And the meeting was, in those days, the meeting would be held at 7:30. And of course, it took place at the address at that time was the first floor town hall, council chamber, Mulberry Place, 5 Cloud Crescent, London E14 2BG. And the service head for democratic services was the long term liar John Williams. The first question recognized in this decision, question from Mr. Muhammad Haq regarding arrangements for auditing and overseeing the conduct of bodies now responsible for formerly council owned and council controlled housing stock. So you can see that 10 years before the so called regulators admitted some of the widespread corruption and criminality of the gangs that took over the properties, housing stock, I was ahead and I questioned the auditing arrangements. Because it was auditing that I was focusing on and I was going to move on to, Rabina Khan got alarmed. And she obviously had meetings with the THCH and Popla Harka well before the meeting or discussions with them, as did the ceremonial chair. So, my question actually, the text, as they're recording here, what is Tower Hamlets Council's constitutionally installed and transparently democratically active audit procedure for overseeing the conduct of those bodies, especially the ones that have been allowed to take over the control of formerly council owned and council controlled housing stock, in the context of the clear and the express undertaking given by Tower Hamlets Council to the community and parts of the community in the borough on the relevant estates affected by the implications of the stock transfer procedures that were put into operation. Now, as they put on the record in the website, this is what Rabina Khan is quoted as saying: the council transferred over 10,000 properties to 8 registered providers under the Housing Choice Program. This was to lever 448 million pounds worth of investment into the stock. Promises made under the Housing Choice Program were included in contracts as obligations which are monitored twice annually by the strategic housing team. That is an absolute, that part contract and monitoring is an absolute lie that Rabina Khan perpetrated in there, whatever the words she actually spake. Spake is to be spelled Spake. It's a pejorative, insulting form that I am using to refer to speak or spoke. The council is currently collecting information on progress made up until the end of 2012 to 2013 financial year. A number of registered providers have reported that they have completed the contractual obligations officers are now establishing an audit process. Now, remember, this is happening in June 2013, which is at least 10 years after the Harka and about 8 years after the THCH gangsters were given the housing stock. Why are they only establishing audit process 8 years and 10 years later? Think about that. So Khan was complacent, to put it kindly, but she was actually part of the corruption. And then, as cabinet member for housing, I work very closely with tenants to ensure democratic accountability registered providers. She does not tell the truth there. She never worked with me. She never worked with me. She never answered my many communications and questions. And she gives a lot of rubbish in there which do not constitute answers to my question, let alone actually answers serious concern about the corruption that was going on at that time in and by and through THCH and Poplaharka. So let's go back to the issue. So Rabina Khan was lying not only at that meeting, but there was this. Let's get to the. I'm only reading what is available on the website. Now, at that point, there is no reference to the meeting being suspended, but the meeting was suspended. So the minutes are untruthful. And what happened was that when the so called ceremonial chair or ceremonial speaker suspended the meeting, a man called a resident in Wapping, is it John Wright, was seen recording Rabina Khan speaking in response to me. How do I know? Because it is there. I filmed an interview with this individual, and we shall talk about that after I search for that particular. So this is the one that I recorded. It's a very short video that I posted on YouTube. So let's see. There is a. Why is my video appearing under trial by jury? Well, it's not showing under that. Let me just say the video that I published originally was republished 26th of February 2014. Let's play what. Where is it coming? Let's check if it is going to appear as a video. It's showing in the search result, but it's not appearing as the video. So we shall look for that particular video and then comment on the contents of what John Wright had said. Right, this is the one. And this is the video that John Wright has put. It is John Wright who has put that video onto the blog, Trial by Jury blogs. And he says, just in case you missed the Khoodeelaar YouTube report featuring you, John, posted in July 2013, here is a good contextual reference for all concerned. Let's play this one. This is my film on John Wright. Behavior of speaker and the others that were actually supporting the speaker stopping you.
Puppets.
How do you sort of describe them in one sentence?
Puppets.
Spitting images.
Because
That's how I felt.
they
Spitting
sit
images.
behind words.
Yeah.
They say the standing orders state. They sit and they think that those words protect them. But surely, and council have got to realise that they're not above the government. But this council seem to think that they're more powerful than the government and do exactly what we like. We don't care about the government. We do exactly what we wish.
They've
Exactly
got
what you said. Look what you said about this. I actually started filming because of your subject.
right.
Because I've had a fight for 8 years
Right.
against the way that Tower Hamlets transferred housing stock and never protected those estates that they handed over
Yes,
into good
it's true.
or
It was
bad
The
hands.
pain I know.
Some of the registered social
Very
landlords are good, and some of them are rubbish. And Tower Hamlets have not protected it. And do you know the most terrible thing? Maybe you don't know this. That you have a right to put a freedom of information request into your government. You have a right to put a freedom of information request into your council. But you don't have a right to put in a freedom of information request to your landlord.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yes.
Did you know that?
No.
Not many people do.
Well,
That's how they get away with things, because we cannot.
Well, this is stupid, John Wright. How the fuck did he even ask me? I don't know that. Fuck him. I have known this long before John Wright was ever heard of by anyone. But there, he's obviously prejudiced and an ingrate, but he admits that he only started filming and he noticed the words he uses because of my subject. Fuck him again. He didn't start filming because of my subject only. He started filming because of my question. And because of the question being misinterpreted and distorted by Rabina Khan. But anyway, that's the video that is accessible on the internet. And this one has been reached via Ted Jury's blog, where John Wright put this to support his role. So there is a question about Khoodeelaar website being in need of renewal by one of these people. And John Wright actually agrees with the Khoodeelaar campaign on that website. But going back to Rabina Khan and the interruption by the chair of the filming by John Wright, what happened was that John Wright was filming, and the chair, who was a member of the gang that constituted the terms community housing, didn't want John Wright to complete the record of my speaking and Rabina Khan answering and getting the whole thing wrong, etc., etc. So that is part of the proof of the brazen complicity with the criminals at THCH exhibited in the behavior of the speaker disrupting the meeting. It wasn't John Wright disrupting the meeting, nor was it me. I asked a question which remains unanswered even by the regulators 10 years on. So, what happened with the THCH was that Mike Tyrrell, who was the longest in post crook, called chief executive of Tar Hamlets Community Housing, demanded payment of £3,000 from me as a tenant in my previous property, which was taken over by the THCH against my wish or preference, as a direct result of John Prescott's criminal facilitation of the crooks taking over the housing stock that included my flat. But I was entitled to housing benefit legally based on the evidence of my entitlement. But as if the corruption by Tar Hamlets Council in creating housing crisis already exhibited was not bad enough, Steve Hill, who was in the post as the benefits manager, repeatedly committed crimes by stopping my housing benefit. Nothing to do with anything I had done. I had done nothing illegal, unlawful, or secretive, or inexplicable. But Steve Hill, the criminal racist, wanted to create a pretext so that I would fall behind the payment of rent on the records. And then that would then in turn allow THCH criminals, Mike Tyrrell in particular, to claim that I had arrears of rent, which was not at all the case. It was created by Steve Hill and Mike Tyrrell. And then once they said that I had arrears, they could then say that I should be subjected to a court process of repossessing my property, which is what happened. So when he did that in 2006, within short time after taking over control of my flat, that I pay the rent stopped by the criminal racist liar Steve Hill, 2006. So what happened? I paid the cash, £3,000, and this money was due back to me because once the housing benefit was reinstated, which I was already working to have reinstated, the money belonged to me. So when the housing benefit was reinstated, this money should have been paid to me in cash, because Mike Tyrrell, the criminal, knew that I didn't have a personal bank account. And yet, they paid the money in a check addressed to me, but I had no bank account in my name. And it's not something that could be transferable to somebody else. So I went there to the THCH office in Shadwell and demanded the payment in cash. And they refused. They made excuses. They couldn't legally say no, but they made excuses. And then they paid a part of the money in a check. But that money that was owed to me was way above the amount that had been owed to them on account of my falsely created arrears created by the Tower Hamlets Council. So I sent the check back in March 2007. I think the check, I sent it back in March 2007 under special delivery and demanded that I be paid the cash. It's £1,500 or something. And that money has never been paid to me. Now, the result was that money that was owed to me was twisted as being money that I still owed to Tower Hamlets community housing, which cannot be the case. So this particular issue will be discussed on its own in a special edition later, Tower Hamlets Council owing me money and causing the serious damages and losses that amount to claims of £10 billion. Think about that. That is why that item will have to be discussed separately.